We are talking today about settlers moving westward, which will result in what we know as the Fort Laramie Treaty. And we have to do a little bit of background review here to make this make sense. As we mentioned yesterday, there were two areas of land that were considered very sacred to the Plains Indians. One was their prime hunting grounds, and the other was their spiritual or burial grounds. And the reason I bring up that point is because by the 1850s, more and more white settlers were moving from lands east of the Mississippi to lands west of the Mississippi, trying to find a new life. They're moving their families to areas such as Oregon and Utah. For those of you that are LDS, that was a big move to Utah, and also to California. And when these people were moving west, they were traveling through those two sacred Plains Indians grounds. They were just kind of going through their hunting grounds, and they're going through burial grounds. How would you like a group of people to walk through the Worland Cemetery and trample over the graves of the people there on the way to wherever they're going? You wouldn't like that. And even though Native Americans celebrated death differently than we do, because they didn't bury their dead, they put them up on top of lodge poles and those types of things, you still do not want people to do that. And so this movement of the white man westward really threatened the Plains Indians' way of life. What were the three things that made up their way of life? Their religion, which would be their spiritual burial grounds; buffalo, which would be their prime hunting grounds; and the ability to have freedom. Okay? Well, these westward movers, so to speak, are threatening their way of life concerning the buffalo and their religion. And so what do the Plains Indians do when these white settlers come through? Well, they don't ask it very politely. They resist, and they harass them, and they continually attack them, kill them in some instances, to the point where these western settlers are asking the federal government to step in and get this stopped. Okay? So they try to do it the easy way the first time, and that occurred in 1851. And what happened in 1851, because of the issues with white settlers moving westward, the government met with 8 different Plains Indian tribes, and they signed a treaty. So in 1851, the federal government was forced to intercede, and they get together with 8 Plains Indian tribes, and they sign a treaty. And this treaty is called the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. So to intercede and try to stop this harassment, attacks, and killings of white settlers moving west because they are going through Plains Indians' burial sites and hunting grounds, the government sets down with 8 different Plains Indian tribes and signs a treaty called the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Now when you sign a treaty, Joe's got to give me something, and I got to give him something in return. What the Indians got from the federal government was $50,000 a year, which would be about $1.6 million in today's money. That would be divided equally among the 8 Plains Indian tribes. So the government was going to give the Indian tribes $50,000 a year, or about $1.6 million in today's currency. What the Indians were going to give in return for that $50,000 a year would be what? Safety of safety of white settlers going west. That was the first thing they were going to give. So for that $50,000 that the tribes are receiving, they are going to guarantee the safety of white settlers moving westward. They're not going to attack them and harass them and kill them anymore. The second thing that the Plains Indians gave to the government in exchange for that $50,000 a year was permission to build forts along what we know as the Bozeman Trail. Permission to build forts along the Bozeman Trail. Now, somebody had to sign for the government, and somebody had to sign for the Native American tribes. And the person that signed this Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 on behalf of the Native American tribes was a Sioux Indian chief by the name of Red Cloud. And Sioux is S-I-O-U-X. S-I-O-U-X. So Sioux Chief Red Cloud signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 for the side of the Plains Indians. You think this worked? It really did work very well, actually, for 14 years. From 1851 through 1865, the federal government made these annual payments. The Plains Indians held up their part of the agreement, and everything was hunky-dory for 14 years. Everything worked very well. Looked like a good solution. But something happened in 1865 and 1866 that changed the status quo, which is going to disrupt this treaty. What changed in 1866?
Was gold discovered in Sioux
Not, you're a little ahead of the game. Not in Sioux country, but we'll get to that. There was gold discovered, but we'll get to that. That's what the other class said, and that was good. And that would cause some people to move westward, right? But what was the biggest thing that happened that caused people to all of a sudden move westward?
Oh, I was going to answer the bathroom.
Oh, we're in 5th period here.
I know, but I didn't have no lunch.
You did.
No.
You don't think you can make it?
No.
Well, I never ask girls if they can make it or not. I know boys can, because I'm making it. Go ahead. So, what event happened in 1866? What ended? Say it. No. What? 1866. What ended?
Mexican-American War.
What?
Mexican-American
1866. When was Lincoln assassinated? 1865. What ended in 1866 for in essence? Are you guys serious?
The Civil War.
The Civil War ended. Well, if you were a Southerner in the Civil War, what did you have going for you?
Nothing.
So what did you do, Gabe?
Leave.
And moved where?
West.
West, for a new life and a new start. The point being is everything was great from 1851 to 1866, but after the Civil War, things began to change. Looking for a new start and a new life, these white settlers began to move west like crazy. And when they moved west like crazy, what did they do? Disrupted the Plains Indians' way of life by going through these burial grounds and going through these hunting grounds in mass numbers. 3 to 4 times as many people started going westward after the Civil War. Partially, as Layton said, because of gold discovery in the Montana Territory, and partly and more because of the Civil War, they needed a new life. Well, what happened then is all of a sudden, because they're disrupting their way of life because of the number of people going west, 3 powerful Sioux chiefs decided they would no longer obey or live up to the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Because what had happened? The times had changed. More people were coming west. More disruption. For those 14 years that worked so well, a few were coming. Now all of a sudden after the Civil War, because of gold in Montana and mainly the Civil War ending and no life for Southerners, what happened? They started to move west. Who were the 3 chiefs that said they would not abide by the Fort Laramie Treaty? Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall. Very powerful Sioux chiefs that said, you know what? We're no longer going to live up to this treaty. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall. Now you don't have to write this down, but Sitting Bull once was quoted as saying, "How can one man represent all of the Sioux? We will no longer abide by such a treaty." Who's he talking about? Red Cloud. And Sitting Bull, I mean, these guys are a little bit hypocritical. They were fine with it as long as there was only a few white settlers going west. And they were fine to take the $50,000 a year, right? But when it became mass exodus out of the eastern part of the United States across the Great Plains, they got upset. Now, from 1866 until 1890, during that period of time between 1866 and 1890, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall are going to make it their life's mission to resist all westward movement by settlers. Between 1866 and 1890, Sitting Bull, Gall, and Crazy Horse are going to make it their life's mission to continue to resist against all westward movement by the settlers. And there's going to be conflicts. And these conflicts are known in history as the Plains Indian Wars. And probably the most famous of the Plains Indians Wars battle happened in southeastern Montana in July of 1876, and we all know it as the Battle of the Little Bighorn. That was a perfect example of the resistance that Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall were going to put up to western movement. Because General Custer was there to keep the Indians from running. He was there to keep them from running away, because his job was to put them on what? And he thought they were going to run away from him. What they did is they turned and fought him instead, which is a big surprise. That's a perfect example. So you can see what's happened here. Well, let's bring us to our next subtopic then, which is building forts along the Bozeman Trail. Building forts along the Bozeman Trail. Now remember, we mentioned before, as part of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, the federal government had permission to build forts along the Bozeman Trail. Anybody know where the Bozeman Trail starts and finishes? You'd think so, but not true. It will go through that area, but where does it start? Anybody know? What? Naya? No. The Bozeman Trail started at Fort Laramie in present-day Laramie, Wyoming. Still there. Started at Fort Laramie, and where did it end? Nope. It ended in those gold fields in Montana in the vicinity of Virginia City. Virginia City. So the Bozeman Trail ran from Fort Laramie in the Wyoming Territory to Virginia City in the Montana Territory. So if you look at my map up here, you're looking, and this is the exact trail, but from here to here. This area was what we know as the Bozeman Trail, which did go right through Bozeman, Montana. Now, the reason that everybody was interested in getting to Virginia City, as was mentioned by Leighton, is that we had gold discovered there, also in nearby Nevada City, and also in western Montana in a place called Bannock. So gold was discovered in Montana, most notably in the Virginia City, Nevada City area. They're about 2 miles apart, those two cities. Still there today, not cities, ghost towns, but very big tourist traps. You can certainly go there and see some of the original buildings, kind of by Ennis, Montana. Real pretty area in western Montana. And Bannock is over by Dillon, Montana, in the western part. But that's where the Bozeman Trail stretched from, Fort Laramie in the Wyoming Territory to Virginia City in the Montana Territory. Now, obviously, because they're no longer going to abide by the treaty, the Sioux Indians begin to resist the movement of white settlers on the Bozeman Trail. Okay, they start to harass them again, and attack them again, and even kill them again. And because of the interference, who do the white settlers turn to take action against this? Federal government. And so what the federal government's going to do is they're going to build forts along the Bozeman Trail. Okay? And this is kind of an interesting, if you remember your Civil War history, which I'm a little nervous about at this point, but anyway. You remember a Civil War general by the name of John Polk? He was the Union commander in the Second Battle of Bull Run, lost decisively to the Confederates. Well, he was still active military, and he was given orders from Washington, D.C. that he was responsible to establish 3 forts on the Bozeman Trail. So former Civil War General John Pope, who was the commander, Union commander at the Second Battle of Bull Run, was given orders from Washington, D.C. to establish 3 forts along the Bozeman Trail. Now, there would be 2 reasons why they would build these forts. Anybody give me a reason why they're building forts? Gabe?
Protection.
Absolutely, to protect the white settlers that are traveling the Bozeman Trail, because what's going to be in those forts? Military personnel. Okay? So the first reason was to provide protection to the white settlers traveling the Bozeman Trail. What else might be another reason? It's protection, but not protection from Indians, but protection from the weather. That a girl. So they were also set up where people could stop and regroup, especially during the winter months. Might even stay there during the winter to get through. so they could go on in the spring. So these forts, these 3 forts on the Bozeman Trail were set up to provide protection to the white settlers traveling the Bozeman Trail from hostile Indians, and also to provide winter quarters for protection to white settlers because of the weather. Now, I'm not going to mention all 3. I'm only going to mention the one that we are interested in. And that fort is not far from here. We will visit it in May. It's called Fort Phil Kearny. Fort Phil Kearny. Does that name ring a bell? It does? Where does that come from? Who was Phil Kearny? He was an Army officer in which war? Very good, the Mexican War. And he won battles at Santa Fe, Mexico, and he also won battles in California at San Diego. And because he was so well thought of, remember he lost an arm, he also lost an arm, they named this fort after him, Fort Phil Kearny. And it was located, the location would be along the Big Piney Creek and the Little Piney Creek near Story, Wyoming, which is not too far from Sheridan, right in the Sheridan area. Okay, Ashton Kittleman served some time there, so to speak. We'll talk about that. So Fort Phil Kearny was going to be built along the Big Piney Creek and the Little Piney Creek near Story, Wyoming. Obviously, once it's built, it's going to be occupied by what? Soldiers. And they're going to be soldiers from the United States Army 18th Regiment. So the soldiers that have been chosen to serve at Fort Phil Kearny will be the United States Army 18th Regiment, under the command of Colonel Henry B. Carrington. So the soldiers that will inhabit Fort Phil Kearny on the Bozeman Trail will be the United States Army 18th Regiment under the command of Colonel Henry B. Carrington. Okay, kiddos, Jaden, my man, what's Carrington's first responsibility going to be as soon as he finds out that his command will be inhabiting Fort Phil Kearny?
Stocking supplies?
Well, before that. Okay, work with the other. Before that, what's he going to do?
Get the supplies?
Before that.
Keep them in.
Before that. He's already got them in. Before that. Before he can put supplies in there, what's he got to do?
Find it.
Well,
Look at it.
you're close with find it. He's going to be the one finding it. He's going to have to, before that, find the location. His first job is to find out where he's going to build. He has the responsibility to pick the location of the site. And he's not a real well-versed in that area. So if you're not well-versed in the area, Naya, what might you do to help you find a good site?
Find someone who is local to it.
That's right, find somebody local to the land that would know about it. And he picked a very famous historic scout by the name of Jim Bridger to help him find the perfect location for this Fort Phil Kearny. Now, you don't know Bridger maybe, he's more of a Montana name, but every time you go to Billings, you drive right through Bridger, Montana, which is named after him. He was a very famous Western scout, knew the land like Naya said, and certainly would be able to pick a good spot. Now, the problem is, it's kind of like I tell you kids, if Peyton comes in and says, Mr. Drew, I really need some advice about this, and they pay me $80,000 a year to give advice, you get to decide whether you take my advice or not. Doesn't matter to me, they're paying me the same, I'm going to give you the best advice I can, and in the end, whose decision is it? Well, Jim Bridger kind of had the same thing because the location that Colonel Carrington picked was not endorsed by Jim Bridger. He did not think that the place he picked for the fort was very good at all. Jim Bridger did not. So it's like Carrington hiring a lawyer and then not taking the lawyer's advice after he pays him all kinds of money to give him advice. He didn't take it. Now, Bridger's concern was that he thought that the local hostile Indians in the area would be a problem for them during the building of the fort, and once they got it built, defending it. That's what he told Carrington. This is a bad spot. You got too many local hostile Indians in this area. They're going to be a huge problem for you when you're building the fort, and there's certainly going to be a problem after you construct the fort. And Jim Bridger's belief would turn out to be very, very accurate. Very, very accurate. So the question is, why in the world would Colonel Carrington pick a spot that was not endorsed by the most famous Western scout in American history? Pay attention, fellas.
It was pretty.
Well, that's true, but why would he not? Now, Lily, you're always ahead of me. Did Carrington pick the spot? His wife, Margaret, picked the spot, and Lily's ahead of me, and one of the reasons she liked the spot is because it was pretty. But, men, pay attention here. The other reason she picked the spot was why? Julie? It'd be like my wife and I going shopping for hunting rifles. I would take her to Shields, and I would take her to Big Bear, and I would take her to the Outdoorsman, I would take her every place I could looking for the perfect gun. And finally she would tell me what? Yes, so just pick this gun, because I'm tired of looking for them, because they don't interest me. That's exactly what Margaret did. She got tired of trying to find a place, got tired of traveling all over this frontier land looking for a location. So she liked the location she picked because it was beautiful, and she was sick and tired of looking. But it was a bad choice. And we'll talk about that as we go through this. Now, not only have they picked a bad spot, but Colonel Carrington's command had morale problems. His men, his command had morale problems. What does that mean, Kyra? If your swimming team has